excited to see Eli and and Tommy, or as Levi calls you, Moshe, which I think is great. Uh, Thank you so much for doing this and being part of this. It's really special to see you.
I normally try and avoid media generally, but when special people ask, I will do it. And honestly just love an excuse to talk to Eli. So I only get once a week right now for a Torah study on Fridays, but twice a week is nice.
Without further ado, Moshe Lubeck, Eli Lapkin, two great individuals. What an important topic to talk about, especially nowadays. Take it away.
I actually got back about 2 weeks ago, so it was very recent. It was a trip through a group called Olami Manhattan in combination with a group called J Roots. They do tours of areas all over the world that used to have vibrant Jewish communities, which sadly are no more. It was really a crazy balance of highs and lows. We would be in the saddest places on earth where the most horrible atrocities happen, and then we would leave literally singing and dancing and hugging each other. As soon as we landed in the airport in Warsaw, we drove to our first stop. We thought maybe we would be getting to rest a little after a long flight, get some food. We went right to a cemetery in Warsaw. So
Mhm.
we're walking around the cemetery. The first thing we learned, the rabbi leading the trip told us that a cemetery in Hebrew is called a Beis HaChaim, a house of life, which I found very interesting. And he explained that in American culture, you think of cemeteries as very scary, spooky places with ghosts and goblins. But in Judaism, the cemetery is actually a very holy place. And it's a place where you can gain a lot of strength in life. And every tombstone tells a story about who a person was during their lives. And in this particular cemetery, they had almost columns marking some of the graves, and the columns were chopped off at the top. I had never seen that before, and that represents a life that was cut short and a person's mission that wasn't complete. And so throughout the trip, we went to almost a dozen cemeteries, and in each one, we would stop at graves of different people and try to get a sense of who they were during their lives, not just how they were killed, but who they were. And all of the tombstones said things like great mother, great father, brother, sister, the things that you strive to be. And so we spent a lot of time in this first cemetery. We walked through, and at the end, we were all standing around in a big circle, and we all went around and said our Hebrew names, which we were told represents our essence of who we are. And the rabbi then told us that on the place where we were standing in a circle, we were standing on top of a mass grave of 150,000 Jews who were murdered in the Warsaw Ghetto. And so that was sort of a punch in the gut. And he said the odds are that someone that we're standing on top of right now has the same exact Hebrew name as us. And what would that person be saying, looking up at us? What would they ask us to do to continue their mission that they never got to finish?
Wow, yeah, that's very moving. It's a lot. And I mean, not only statistically does someone have the same Hebrew name as you, but there's only all Ashkenazi Jews in particular are no more than say ninth cousins away, right? So I mean, the odds are also that you we are related. Is there anything that shifted your awareness from something that you knew intellectually to something that you felt physically or spiritually, that really helped you kind of orient that or change your perception?
Definitely. I think one thing is that everyone grows up hearing the number 6 million. 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, which, from a lot of what we learned, it may very well have been much higher than that. But the theme throughout the trip that our tour guide Svi kept saying is that it wasn't 6 million Jews that were killed, it was 6 million and one, because the one is really what matters. 6 million is just an unfathomable number. The most people, any of us have ever seen, maybe if you're in a giant stadium, would be like 100,000 people. So to even wrap your head around what 6 million is just, it doesn't compute in your brain. But to think that each of those 6 million people was a person with an entire life, a job, a family, people they loved, things they liked to do, and all of that was taken from them in the most brutal way. That I think was something that you can really only feel when you're on a trip like this, because the trip wasn't about the 6 million, it was about the one. We went to an attic where a Polish family had hid Jews for 2 years in the attic of their barn. And so we crowded 40 of us into this attic. I had my winter coat on, my boots, my ski mask, my scarf, my hat, my gloves, and I was freezing cold. We were all shivering there, sitting. We were in there for maybe 45 minutes or an hour, freezing cold. A family of 3 or 4 people spent 2 years in that attic in the freezing cold. They didn't have coats or gloves, and they were just sitting there for 2 years hiding, praying that at any moment they wouldn't be discovered.
That there were the righteous among the nations who were doing brave things like keeping an entire family in their attic for 2 years. Think about what kind of deed that is for another person. Oftentimes people that they might not know, and at tremendous risk to themselves, certainly to be paid back with nothing.
One thing I found really interesting is how strongly people clung on to being Jewish. People from all religious backgrounds, that in the last moments of their lives, they really fought to remain Jewish. We heard so many stories about this. So, for example, there was notoriously the train cars would bring you into Birkenau, the death camp of Auschwitz, and you would be unloaded from the train car. And then they would basically decide if you're going to live or if you're going to die, if you're going to go over to the work side of the camp or if you're going to go straight to the gas chambers. And so in that moment, there was a lot of panic going on. And so as we're standing by one of these train cars, we heard a number of stories, one of which was a man, and this was a common theme, where the only objects people grabbed with them when they were being rounded up and herded into these carts were their tallis and tefillin. It was literally the only thing they took with them. And so one guy in the frenzy realized he had dropped his tefillin in the train car as everyone's jumping out. And they all knew what was going to happen to them at this point. And so he ran back in and started to put on his tefillin for the last time. And as he was doing that, the Germans beat him to death while he was doing that. And another story from that same line was of a little girl who managed to survive. And she had been on a tour with our tour guide, Svi, and told him this story, which was as she saw her parents for the last time getting into the death line, they looked at her and said, "Live as a Jew and die as a Jew. You should be proud to be Jewish, and you should want to carry on these traditions even when you're faced with tough circumstances." So I think hearing all of those sorts of stories just woven throughout all of the different places we went really add a lot of meaning to it.
Yeah, it's certainly moving, and I know that stories that particularly resonated with me as well are just like the ones that you told, especially with tefillin and things like this. Why do I not in the morning? Why do I not have the zeal and alacrity to put on tefillin that somebody does as their last act, right? I have the freedom to do it. There's no, but in my head, there's no rush, right? But what a tremendous thing that somebody's willing to die for. Like, let me get it in one last time. This act of kind of spiritual holiness.
Another one was in the Warsaw Ghetto. There was essentially a known incursion that was going to happen the next day from the Germans essentially invading the ghetto to deport people. And it was during Pesach. And so this family, this one father, had saved a few scraps of matzah from the year before. And they had an actual Passover Seder, even though they knew what was going to happen the next day. And they still took other preparations. There were a few guns that had been smuggled into the ghetto. And so they were doing both. They were having their spiritual preparation, but they also were taking physical precautions. You can't not live in the real world. But for thousands of years, Jewish people have been telling the story of the Passover Seder, and they didn't want that to stop.
Your daughters, Rebbetzin Nechama Rothstein, Elchavada Vanderbilt. You've been listening to this fantastic conversation between these two strong, proud young Jews. What questions or thoughts? I know you probably have for Eli.
Yes, my question is, if you got a chance to talk to the German people who are alive today and what you felt about them.
We did interact with a few Polish people. It's sort of a tense subject in Poland. The Polish government in recent years has done a lot of whitewashing of history. A lot of the museums at the camps are run by Polish directors who they convey the history of the Germans invading Poland and killing a lot of Poles, which they did, but they sort of cover up some of the history of the Poles being complicit in killing Jews. And so there were definitely a lot of nice Polish people. We met people whose their ancestors had hid Jews in their houses, and they still live in those houses. And so a lot of these people were very nice and recognized the history of what happened. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of Holocaust education, and the government, if Poland is not helping. At the end of our tour of Auschwitz-Birkenau, we had spent 6 hours there. And the last stop on the tour is to go into a gas chamber. And in this gas chamber was where thousands upon thousands of Jews were killed. And in their final moments, all they did was scream out Shema Yisrael. And they screamed it so loud that the Germans could hear it through the stone walls of the gas chamber that they learned the words. Because every day they were gassing thousands of people, and so they would hear the same thing over and over again. And so we went into the gas chamber. We all put our hands on the stone wall, and you could feel the scratches in the wall of the people in their last moments, literally just fighting to get out. And we just sang over and over again, Shema Yisrael. And we were all crying in here, just saying Shema Yisrael over and over again. And then we left the gas chamber and immediately started singing Am Yisroel Chai and dancing and singing and marching out of this big tunnel that leads you out of the museum. So it was a crazy juxtaposition once again from this just intense emotional experience, knowing that so many Jews had their last moments in here saying Shema, and we were able to walk out of there. It was a weird sensation. But a lot of what we talked about before going in there was just about how much power the Jewish people had when they're unified and when they're praying together. And an SS guard notoriously, maybe not notoriously, but he was quoted as saying, "We'll never beat a people who pray in a hell like this."
Seeing these two young men, these two proud, strong Jews, gives us hope. And this idea of ending off on a thought of doing a mitzvah, to live as a Jew, to be that one, to answer that call of what I'm going to do, is inherent in you too. You two guys here tonight are doing that. You two guys are that hope.